One by one, the nuns began to show signs of pregnancy, and the shocking truth would leave everyone speechless. Hello everyone, sit back, relax, and join us as we unravel this mysterious tale. Deep in the Appalachian Mountains of the United States stood St. Benedict's Monastery, a place known for its strict austerity and profound devotion. The nuns there lived in complete seclusion, dedicating their entire lives to prayer and adherence to the Word of God. Their only connection to the outside world was through monastery-approved charity work. Everything was in perfect order until one morning, everything changed. The chapel bell tolled, calling the nuns for their morning prayers. Dressed in their black habits, they walked silently to their pews, bowing their heads in solemn prayer. At the front, before the altar, stood Mother Superior Marilyn, her expression a mixture of stern discipline and quiet warmth. But before she could begin the service, a sudden gasp broke the silence. Sister Emily, a young nun of 22, had collapsed to the floor. The monastery erupted in chaos. "Emily!" cried Sister Agnes, rushing to her side in a panic. Emily's face was pale, her breathing ragged. One hand was clutched tightly to her abdomen, as if in excruciating pain. The other nuns exchanged worried glances, while a few ran to get help. Mother Superior Marilyn approached quickly, her face etched with concern. "Take her to the infirmary." "Now," she commanded without hesitation. Sister Anne and Sister Anita helped Emily to her feet and carried her to the infirmary, while the other nuns whispered amongst themselves in fear. A strange sense of dread hung in the air. Something was wrong, but no one dared to speak it aloud. Half an hour later, Dr. Charles Miller arrived, a veteran physician accustomed to treating members of religious communities. He had seen a great deal in his career, but on this day, his face was ashen, and his hands trembled slightly. Mother Superior Marilyn approached him, her voice steady but laced with worry. "Doctor, what is happening to her?" Dr. Miller hesitated before speaking in a low voice. "Sister Emily is showing the clear signs of pregnancy." Mother Superior Marilyn froze. "That's impossible," she said forcefully, her voice cold and hard. "No one here would break their sacred vows." "I understand your doubt," Dr. Miller replied with a sigh, wiping sweat from his brow. "But the signs are unmistakable. Her abdomen is slightly swollen, and she is experiencing the common symptoms of pregnancy." A heavy silence filled the room. "We need to examine all the nuns," Dr. Miller continued. Mother Superior Marilyn stood rooted to the spot for a few moments before finally nodding. The news spread through the monastery like wildfire, and soon, an even more shocking truth was discovered. It wasn't just Emily. At least 5 other nuns were presenting the same symptoms. Mother Superior Marilyn felt her world turn upside down. These young women had dedicated their lives to God and had never been exposed to the world. How could this have happened? No man had ever been allowed inside the monastery grounds. It was impossible, and yet, it was true. Meanwhile, rumors began to circulate outside the monastery walls. The local townsfolk had always held the nuns in high regard, but now, speculation began to fester. Some believed the monastery was cursed. Others, more cynical, whispered quietly of sin. Soon, the scandal reached the ears of Bishop Armand. Known for his rigid adherence to church law, Bishop Armand prided himself on his reputation for discipline and purity, and he had no tolerance for shame. The moment he received the news, he called an emergency meeting. "This is unacceptable," his voice thundered through the cathedral. "We cannot allow this scandal to tarnish the name of the church." A young priest, Father Peter, spoke up hesitantly. "Your Excellency, perhaps there is an explanation. We don't know the full story yet." "There is nothing to explain," Bishop Armand cut him off sharply. "The only truth here is that nuns have violated their vows." "But what if they are innocent?" "Their innocence is not the issue," the bishop roared. "We will find the truth, and if there are guilty parties, they will face the consequences." Just a few hours later, a motorcade of black sedans arrived at St. Benedict's Monastery. As Bishop Armand and his entourage stepped out, a chilling silence fell over the grounds. The nuns stood in a line, their heads bowed, their hands trembling. Mother Superior Marilyn stepped forward, her voice calm but heavy with emotion. "Your Excellency, I trust you are here to find the truth." Bishop Armand glared at the frightened nuns. "The truth is already clear, Mother Marilyn. What is needed now is judgment." Within a day, the news had spread throughout the town. Outside the monastery, a crowd began to gather. At first, they were quiet observers, but soon the whispers turned into shouts, and the talk turned to rage. "They are sinners," one man shouted. "God will punish them." The women who had once admired the nuns now looked at them with contempt. "We trusted them," an old woman said angrily, "and now they have defiled the Lord." The first stones hit the gates. From a monastery balcony, Mother Superior Marilyn watched the crowd's fury ignite. She knew this was only the beginning. The heavy wooden doors remained shut, but outside, the cries grew louder. A volley of rocks rained against the walls. Inside, the tension was suffocating. Bishop Armand wasted no time. From this moment on, he declared sternly, "No one is permitted to leave this monastery. We will get to the bottom of this." Mother Superior Marilyn took a deep breath, staring at him. "Your Excellency, something is wrong here," she said firmly. "My sisters are innocent." Bishop Armand laughed bitterly. "Then, explain this," he sighed. "If they are innocent, how do you explain the undeniable signs of pregnancy?" Mother Superior Marilyn stood in silence, her mind racing for an explanation. She had no answer. Bishop Armand, determined to leave no room for doubt, turned to Dr. Miller. "This time, nothing will be overlooked," he commanded. The nuns were gathered in a large hall, where they were subjected to a rigorous examination under the scrutinizing eyes of Bishop Armand and a group of senior priests. Some trembled, praying silently, but they were sharply told to be quiet. "Why must we endure this humiliation?" asked Sister Anne, one of the eldest nuns, on the verge of tears. "We are innocent." Sister Anita squeezed her hand reassuringly, but their pleas were ignored. One by one, the nuns were taken into the examination room. The youngest of them, Sister Helen, who was barely 20 years old, fainted from sheer terror when the doctor touched her hand. Sister Paula sobbed as she was repeatedly questioned about something she could not explain. "Tell the truth, and you will be forgiven," an old priest said. "But I have done nothing wrong," Paula cried in response. From a distance, Bishop Armand watched, his arms crossed. Every desperate plea from the nuns only strengthened his belief that they were hiding something. After many hours, the shocking results came out. 12 nuns showed clear symptoms of pregnancy. When this news spread outside the monastery, the rage of the townsfolk intensified. Outside the monastery, an angry mob had formed. With every passing moment, their fury grew stronger. They carried picket signs with harsh accusations: sinners, liars, traitors to the faith. Some threw rotten eggs at the gates, while others carried torches threatening to burn the building down. "They have desecrated the church," a man yelled. "Bring them out! We want justice!" Inside, the nuns gathered in the chapel. Their sobs echoed off the stone and marble walls. Mother Superior Marilyn stood before a statue of Christ, her heart breaking. She wanted to defend her sisters, but the monastery was no longer a sanctuary. It had become a prison. Meanwhile, the mob outside grew more violent. Inside, Bishop Armand decided on a cruel course of action. "If you confess, there may still be mercy," he announced, looking at the terrified faces of the nuns. A piece of paper was placed before them. "Sign this. Admit your sins." Sister Evelyn, a quiet and gentle nun, burst into tears. "But we have done nothing wrong." Bishop Armand sighed, then nodded to a priest beside him. "Anyone who refuses to sign will be excommunicated from the church." The weight of his words crushed their spirits. Excommunication was their deepest fear. Some began to tremble. Sister Agnes, her hands shaking, slowly picked up the pen. Her tears fell onto the paper as she signed it. "Don't sign it!" Mother Superior Marilyn's voice thundered with desperation. But it was too late. Driven by fear, despair, and the terror of being cast out, some of them signed. Others, though hesitant, were slowly overcome by their fear. That night, no one slept. The nuns were locked in their individual cells, strictly forbidden to leave. Mother Superior Marilyn, who had led the monastery for 2 decades, was now completely powerless. In the silence, she heard a soft sob. "I'm scared." She turned. It was Sister Helen, the youngest of them. Her small body was still trembling. "What is going to happen to us, Mother?" she asked weakly, her voice barely a whisper. Marilyn had no answer. For the first time, she felt her own faith in justice beginning to fade. While the nuns were drowning in fear and sorrow, Bishop Armand and his colleagues were satisfied. Everything was proceeding according to plan. A smile played on Armand's lips. "We will soon cleanse this monastery of its deceit," he said. A priest beside him nodded. "The people are on your side now. No one believes the nuns anymore." Armand took a sip of wine, his gaze fixed on the heavily barred monastery gates. He had absolute power now. Only one step remained. Yet, even in the darkest of moments, a flicker of light can remain. Mother Superior Marilyn knew she had one last chance. That night, she carefully wrote a letter, sealed it in an envelope, and handed it to Sister Anne, the only nun still permitted to leave the monastery for essential errands. "Take this to Father Richard," she whispered. Sister Anne's hands trembled as she accepted the letter. "Do you think he can help us?" Marilyn wasn't sure, but she had to try. If not, the monastery would be destroyed by a sin they had not committed. Outside, the town's anger was growing. Their shouts were relentless, their fists pounding on the monastery gates. Torches flickered in the dark sky, reflecting the burning rage of the people. Inside, the air grew heavier. The nuns remained confined, strictly forbidden to leave. Mother Superior Marilyn had been stripped of her authority. Now, everything was in the hands of Bishop Armand. The next day, a meeting was held inside the monastery. Armand sat at the head of the table, surrounded by senior priests, all with stern expressions. "We cannot allow this monastery to continue the shame it has brought upon the church," Armand said firmly. "I propose we immediately expel all nuns showing signs of pregnancy." The room fell silent. Then, a single voice dissented. "But what if we were mistaken in the diagnosis?" It was Father Stephen. His words hung in the air, challenging the fate Armand had already decided. Bishop Armand's eyes narrowed in annoyance. A mistake? 12 nuns, all with the same symptoms? What more evidence do you need? Father Stephen pressed his lips together, unwilling to argue further. Another priest chimed in. "I agree with the bishop," said Father Nestor. "If we do not act swiftly, this scandal will destroy the church's reputation." A deceitful smile appeared on Armand's lips. "Then it is settled," he declared. "All those found guilty will be excommunicated." When this decision was announced, the rage of the people outside the monastery grew even worse. They lit candles and raised their placards filled with threats. "Cast them out. This is no longer a house of God. Liars! Deceivers!" The pounding on the gates grew stronger, each blow a reminder of the approaching danger. Inside, the nuns trembled. Some whispered fervent prayers, while others wept silently, tears streaming down their faces. "We're going to die here," Sister Paula whispered. Sister Evelyn held her tightly, her voice barely a whimper. "God will not abandon us." But even as she said it, her own faith was corroding. That evening, a tragedy occurred. Sister Helen, the youngest among them, could no longer bear the strain. "There's no way out," she whispered, her body shaking. "We're all going to be condemned." Sister Anita quickly reached for her, trying to calm her. "No, Helen, we will find a way. We must be strong." But it was too late. In a flash of desperation, she lunged forward, slamming her head against the cold stone wall. She collapsed instantly. "Helen!" A voice roared in horror as the nuns rushed to her side. Blood flowed from her forehead, her vision blurring. Mother Superior Marilyn stood frozen, silent tears streaming down her face. "My God," she whispered, "this cannot go on." When Armand was informed of what had happened, his response was chillingly cold. "She chose that path," he said without emotion. Father Peter, the youngest on the council, could no longer contain his anger. "Don't you see what is happening? Your persecution drove her to take her own life." Armand shot him a sharp glare. "She was weak," he said coldly, "and the weak have no place in the church." Peter trembled with rage, but he knew he could do nothing more if he continued to argue. The nuns were locked away. Soon, a new order was issued. Anyone showing symptoms of pregnancy was to be moved to a separate wing, forbidden from speaking to anyone. Iron locks were fastened to their doors. "They've thrown us into the dark," Sister Agnes said, her voice low but full of anger. "They treat us like criminals," Sister Anne replied, biting her lip. "But we have done nothing wrong. No one was listening." Despite everything, Mother Superior Marilyn never gave up. She knew they still had one hope, Father Richard. But how could she reach him? In the dead of night, she called for Sister Anne. "You are still allowed to leave, aren't you?" Anne nodded, doubt in her eyes. Then take this letter to Father Richard. Let no one see you. Fear gripped Anne's heart as she clutched the folded letter. If she were caught, the punishment would be certain. But they had no other choice. Steeling her resolve, she crept out, moving slowly through the monastery courtyard, where guards were now posted. Her heart pounded as she moved through the shadows. A light flickered ahead. Someone was coming. She pressed herself against a cold wall, holding her breath. A figure passed just inches away from her, unaware of her presence. She didn't wait. She ran. Reaching a side gate, she slipped through a narrow opening and disappeared into the darkness. She had to find Father Richard. It was their last hope. Outside the monastery, the fury of the town did not subside. The thick walls could not silence their cries of hatred. The relentless pounding on the gates, the flames of the torches serving as a grim warning in the dark night. Inside, fear was more pervasive than light. The nuns were imprisoned, their fate held solely in the hands of Bishop Armand. The next day, an emergency meeting was convened inside the monastery. Armand sat at the end of the table, surrounded by senior priests, their expressions grave. "We cannot allow this disgrace to continue," he said firmly. "I propose we immediately expel all nuns showing symptoms of pregnancy." A heavy silence filled the room. Then, a voice floated through the air. "But is it possible we were mistaken in the diagnosis?" It was Father Stephen again. His question lingered, silently challenging the decision Armand had made. Meanwhile, outside the monastery, Sister Anne was running along a dark path toward the town. The cold wind whipped against her skin, but she didn't stop. She couldn't stop. Just as she crossed the monastery's boundary, a voice stopped her. "Where are you going?" Anne froze. She turned around slowly. Under the moonlight, a figure stood, his eyes fixed on her. It was Father Nestor, one of the senior priests, not as cruel as Armand, but too cowardly to oppose him. Anne swallowed hard, her heart racing. Was she caught? "I just needed some fresh air," Sister Anne answered carefully, clutching the letter tightly in her palm. Father Nestor's eyes narrowed as he took a step closer. "At this hour?" His voice was tinged with suspicion. Anne took a small step back, her heart pounding. "I think you're carrying something," Nestor continued, his eyes fixed on her hand. "Please, Father," she said, a desperate tremor in her voice. "Don't stop me." Nestor stared at her for a long moment, but his expression slowly softened. The suspicion was replaced by doubt. "You're going to Father Richard, aren't you?" Anne stiffened. She couldn't lie. The silence stretched between them, but then, suddenly, Nestor looked away. "Go," he said. Anne gasped, not expecting it. But she had no time to question her fortune. She bowed her head silently in gratitude before disappearing into the night. Inside the monastery, Bishop Armand had completely cut off Mother Superior Marilyn from everyone else. Guards were posted outside her room day and night to ensure no one could approach her. Armand knew she was the last line of defense for the nuns, and he wanted to silence her completely, but she was not entirely abandoned. One night, Father Peter, the youngest on the council, slipped past the guards and entered her room. He spoke quickly, his voice low. "Mother Marilyn, almost the entire council is on Armand's side. If something doesn't change soon, you will be formally removed from your position." Marilyn listened silently, her expression unwavering. "Have faith in the truth, Father Peter," she replied firmly. "Justice will not be denied." Peter hesitated, as if he wanted to say more, but in the end, he simply nodded and left. The next day, everyone gathered in the monastery courtyard. Bishop Armand stood on a raised platform, looking down at the assembled nuns and priests. The faces in the crowd were filled with anxiety. "Mother Superior Marilyn's weak leadership has brought this monastery to ruin," he declared, his voice cutting through the silence. They made Marilyn stand before everyone, but she remained calm, unflinching. "I do not believe my sisters are guilty," she answered steadily. Armand laughed cruelly. "Then, Mother Marilyn," he said, his eyes glittering with cold authority, "how do you explain those with the signs of pregnancy? Do you have an explanation?" She didn't answer. She had no proof, but she knew in the depths of her heart that a great deception was taking place. Armand immediately seized the opportunity. "If you have any honor left," his voice boomed, "admit your failure and step down from your position." The nuns were silent, dejected. Some were weeping, but no one dared to speak. Armand was beginning to triumph. His power was slowly enveloping the entire monastery. Some of the nuns, overcome with fear and doubt, began to weaken. Sister Anita whispered to Sister Paula, "What if Bishop Armand is right?" Paula's eyes widened. "What do you mean?" Anita hesitated. What if one of us really did break our vows?" Paula gripped her hand tightly. "Listen to me," she said sternly. "Don't let doubt poison you. This is not our fault." But it was too late. Armand had planted the seeds of doubt. He didn't need to force the nuns to confess. All he needed was for them to doubt themselves. 3 days later, the final judgment was delivered. All 12 nuns were to be exiled from the monastery and permanently barred from any religious order. "They will be cast out tomorrow," Armand announced cruelly. Some nuns collapsed in sobs, others prayed desperately, but nothing could change the decision. In her cell, Mother Superior Marilyn closed her eyes and whispered, "Lord, save us." No miracle came. 20 miles from the monastery, in a small town, Father Richard read the letter Anne had brought him. As he read the final lines, his face grew pale. "My God," he whispered. Sister Anne stood before him, trembling. "Do you believe us?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Richard's gaze was sharp. "I believe you," he answered. He stood up abruptly, a fierce determination in his eyes. "We have to save them before it's too late." That night, the nuns were locked tightly in their cells. Outside, Armand arrogantly savored his victory, completely unaware of the approaching danger. Father Richard was on his way. At sunrise, at St. Benedict's monastery, peace did not arrive. Instead, a tragedy began. One by one, the 12 nuns were brought out of their cells, forced to walk towards the monastery gates. Their faces were pale, their hands trembling. They were being expelled, never to return, with no place left for them in the church. Outside the gates, the angry mob was waiting. They had nowhere to run, no protection, and above all, their honor had been utterly destroyed. The chapel bell tolled, not to call to prayer, but to announce the downfall of these women. At the gates stood Bishop Armand, his hands clasped, his expression cold and emotionless. "You have betrayed God," he declared emphatically. "You have betrayed the church." His voice echoed throughout the courtyard, a verdict that could not be undone. "Now, it is time for you to pay for your sins." Mother Superior Marilyn was helpless, forced to witness the cruel scene unfolding before her. She had done everything to stop this injustice, but here they were, disowned by the very institution that should have protected them. Sister Paula was crying, clutching the fabric of her habit. "We did nothing wrong. Please, let us explain." Armand didn't even glance at her. "You had your chance to confess," he said, without a trace of sympathy, "but you chose to resist." With a single gesture of his hand, the monastery gates swung open. Outside, the angry mob was waiting. The moment the nuns stepped out, the crowd's fury exploded. "Traitors to God!" a man shouted. "You are cursed! Get out!" Stones began to fly. Sister Agnes quickly shielded Sister Helen, protecting the youngest nun from harm. A rock struck her shoulder, causing her to kneel in pain. Mother Superior Marilyn rushed forward, placing herself between her sisters and the enraged crowd. "Stop this," she pleaded. "They are innocent." But no one listened. A man threw dirty water on them. An old woman, once a faithful supporter of the monastery, spat on the ground. "I used to respect you," she whispered coldly, "but you are nothing but liars." Tears streamed down Sister Paula's face as she looked back at the monastery one last time. Everything they had ever known, their home, their faith, their dignity, was gone. Amidst the chaos, Armand stood with a triumphant smile. He had won. He had brought everyone under his thumb, secured absolute control of the monastery, and consolidated his power. Father Peter stood at a distance, unable to move. "Do you feel no shame?" he whispered. Armand glanced at him for a moment, before smirking bitterly. "Shame? I have just saved the honor of the church." But in the middle of the angry mob, a figure appeared. Father Richard had arrived. Near the monastery gates, Sister Anne clung to the iron bars, her eyes filled with hope. Would he make it in time? Richard moved quickly, but before he could reach Armand, he was blocked by guards. "I need to speak with the bishop. Now!" he commanded firmly, but the guards didn't move. He could do nothing but watch as the innocent nuns were thrown out of the monastery like criminals. Without hesitation, Armand ordered the gates to be closed. With a loud thud, the heavy doors slammed shut, as if to completely erase the women from their former lives. Sister Helen trembled, her large eyes filled with fear. "Where will we go?" Marilyn held her tightly. "I don't know," she answered honestly, "but I will not leave you." They walked away slowly, enduring the cold stares of the townsfolk they had once considered family. Father Richard remained standing before the gates, his fists clenched. His voice was low, but steady. "This is a mistake." No one answered, but among the guards, some glanced at each other. A few of them were having doubts. They had witnessed too much injustice and were beginning to question Armand's authority. Richard stepped back, knowing he couldn't breach the gates now, but he had already begun to plan. After a few hours of silent walking, the nuns reached the edge of a dense forest. They shivered from the cold, their bodies exhausted. "We'll rest here for the night," Marilyn announced. Sister Agnes hugged Sister Helen, trying to warm her. Sister Paula looked up at the sky silently, tears falling down her cheeks. They had lost everything, but they were still together. Inside the monastery, Armand sat in his office, downing a glass of wine, savoring his victory. He thought it was all over. He didn't know that in just a few days, a terrifying truth would come to light. Meanwhile, in a small church in a neighboring town, Father Richard was quickly flipping through an old medical textbook. Seated across from him was Sister Anne, her hands clasped nervously. "Have you found anything?" she asked, her voice barely audible. Richard turned another page, and suddenly his eyes widened. "Here it is," he whispered. Anne leaned closer. "What did you find?" Richard pointed emphatically at a line of text. "The symptoms the nuns experienced," he said, looking at Anne with an intense expression, "are not always an indication of pregnancy." Anne could hardly breathe. "Then what does it mean?" Richard took a deep breath. "They could have been poisoned by an artificial hormone." A chill ran down Anne's spine. "You mean it was deliberate?" Richard nodded. "We need to re-examine their tests, but I believe this was a conspiracy." That night, Richard met secretly with Dr. Samuel Foster, a doctor who was not under the influence of the church. Dr. Foster studied the reports and symptoms of the nuns intently. After a long silence, he looked at Richard, his expression dark. "You're right, Father. These symptoms are not from a natural pregnancy." Richard's brow furrowed. "Then, is it possible that—" "Doctor," Foster nodded slowly. "If we test their blood, we might find evidence. But I need a sample from one of the nuns." In the forest, Marilyn listened carefully as Sister Anne recounted Father Richard's discovery. Her expression darkened. If it's true they were poisoned, who would do this, and why? But before they could find the answers, they needed to get the evidence. "I will go," Marilyn said firmly. Sister Agnes gasped. "Mother, no! If you're caught—" "If I don't go," Marilyn interrupted, "we will never clear our names." Wrapped in a thick cloak, Marilyn secretly set out for the town. Before she left, she looked at the nuns who had gone through every trial with her. "Pray for me," she whispered. Sister Paula hugged her, whispering through her tears, "May God protect you." And that night, Mother Superior Marilyn disappeared into the darkness, ready to find the truth. Meanwhile, inside the monastery, Armand began to sense a secret force moving against him. His gaze sharpened when he saw Father Peter, the one priest who still dared to question him. "There is still one who does not obey," Armand muttered to himself. He fixed his gaze on Peter. "Is there something you wish to say to me?" Peter said nothing, but in his heart, a fire was rekindled. When Marilyn arrived at Dr. Foster's home, her heart was pounding. The doctor's expression was grave as he silently led her inside. "I need to take a blood sample," he said. Marilyn nodded and extended her arm. As the needle pierced her skin, she closed her eyes and prayed softly. She knew that if they were caught, they would not get a second chance. At the monastery, Armand suddenly felt an inexplicable sense of unease. "Find Marilyn! Now!" he shouted. His guards spread out, searching every corner of the monastery and its surroundings. But by the time they reached the forest, it was too late. She was gone. 3 days later, the test results arrived. Father Richard held a paper in his trembling hands, his heart racing. Across from him, Dr. Foster took a deep breath before speaking. "None of them are pregnant." Sister Anne's eyes widened. Then what caused their symptoms? Dr. Foster's face darkened. It was caused by an artificial hormone, something deliberately put in their food or water. A cold dread crept up Richard's spine. It was deliberate, he said softly, and he knew who was behind it. Anne gasped as everything slowly became clear. Armand. He did this to seize control of the monastery. Richard nodded grimly, his jaw clenched in anger. Now that we have the evidence, we must expose the truth before it's too late. But before they could act, a townsman rushed into the room, out of breath. They're coming. Richard stood up immediately. Outside, torches were blazing as Armand's men surrounded the building. They moved too fast, Anne whispered nervously. Richard looked at the documents on the table. If they were caught, all the evidence would be lost. We have to leave. Now, he said firmly. Dr. Foster quickly gathered the papers and stuffed them into a leather bag. There's a secret passage in the back. Take it, and it will lead you to the forest outside of town. Richard gripped Dr. Foster's hand tightly. You must leave too. If they suspect you, they will not spare you. Dr. Foster hesitated, but finally he nodded. I will go south. Be careful, Father Richard. There was no time for more words. Richard and Anne immediately fled into the night. A moment later, the front door burst open, and the soldiers entered. Dr. Foster, the captain said coldly, are you hiding someone? Though his heart was pounding, Dr. Foster remained calm. I am just a doctor. Why would I hide anyone? The captain looked around the room suspiciously, but Richard and Anne were gone. They had escaped. At the edge of the forest, the nuns huddled together, shivering in the cold air. Sister Paula broke the silence. How long must we hide? She whispered. Marilyn had no answer. She knew they couldn't stay in the shadows forever, but returning meant certain danger. Suddenly, footsteps approached. The nuns prepared to run, but a familiar voice called out, Mother Marilyn! I have news! From the darkness, Sister Anne and Father Richard appeared, breathless from their journey. Marilyn rushed to them, gripping Richard's hand. Did you find anything? Silently, Richard pulled the crumpled papers from his bag. You were never pregnant. The nuns gasped in shock. Sister Agnes clutched her chest. Then, what caused the symptoms? Richard's expression was one of intense anger. Someone mixed an artificial hormone into your food and water. Silence enveloped them all. Marilyn took a slow breath, forcing herself to be strong. Who was behind this? Richard looked directly into her eyes. Armand. Inside St. Benedict's monastery, Bishop Armand sat in his office, believing he had finally triumphed. But in a corner of the room, Father Peter could no longer hold back. You have gone too far, he said, trembling with rage. You have destroyed this entire monastery for your ambition. Armand laughed coldly. So naive, Peter. This isn't about ambition, it's about power. Peter's fists clenched, but he could do nothing without evidence. In the forest, Marilyn made a decision. We have to go back. Sister Helen was shocked. But if we go back, they will capture us. Marilyn's gaze remained firm. We have the proof. If we do not act, evil will win. Father Richard nodded resolutely. I will go with you. The time has come. The moment Marilyn and Richard emerged from the forest, a soldier spotted them. His eyes widened, and he immediately spurred his horse back towards the monastery. Inform the bishop, he yelled. They have returned. The next day, a tense atmosphere enveloped St. Benedict's monastery. Armand stood on the monastery steps, his head held high, watching the nuns he had expelled approach. Marilyn walked forward, her gaze fixed on Armand. I know what you did, Armand. The bishop raised an eyebrow slightly, forcing a calm demeanor. Oh? And how do you plan to prove it? Father Richard held up a piece of paper, displaying it for all to see. With this, he said firmly, we have evidence. A murmur went through the crowd. The senior priests exchanged worried glances. A cold feeling crept through Armand's body. He could feel power beginning to shift. For the first time, Father Peter stepped forward. If you are innocent, then let a council of the church prove the truth. Armand had no answer. He had nowhere left to run. Darkness had long shrouded St. Benedict's monastery. But finally, the light was beginning to appear. Standing at the gates was Mother Superior Marilyn, facing Bishop Armand, the man who had destroyed her name and her sister's. But this time, she was not alone. Father Richard held the irrefutable truth. The test results proving the nuns had never been pregnant. They had been poisoned with an artificial hormone. A tense silence fell over everyone. The eyes of the senior priest were filled with doubt. Father Peter took the document from Richard and studied it carefully. If this is true, who is responsible? Richard did not hesitate. He looked directly at Armand. You already know the answer. A low laugh escaped Armand as he tried to hide the doubt on his face. Nonsense. You are trying to invent a story to cover for these sinful women. Marilyn stepped forward again, her voice steady. If they are guilty, then allow an independent doctor to re-examine them. If you have nothing to hide, why would you refuse? Armand was momentarily stunned, but quickly regained his composure, turning to the senior priests. Your imagination is running wild. We cannot trust an unknown doctor. A new voice broke through the whispers. I am Dr. Samuel Foster. From the crowd, the doctor emerged, his head held high, without a trace of fear. I personally examined the nuns' blood. I swear before God, they are innocent. The atmosphere shifted to one of shock. The people who had once condemned the nuns suddenly hesitated. A man whispered, Were we wrong? An old woman held a hand to her face, trembling. I cursed them, but they were innocent. Father Stephen faced Armand, his expression now full of suspicion. Your Excellency, if you have nothing to hide, let an independent medical council re-examine them. Armand's fists clenched, but his face remained unchanged. I have nothing to prove. Richard looked at him directly. Then what are you afraid of? Armand didn't speak. He knew his control was slipping away. I have proof. Everyone turned. From the shadows, a figure stepped forward. It was Father Nestor. Armand froze, his face pale. You, he whispered in a choked cry. Nestor walked forward, holding a small notebook. This is a journal from a doctor who collaborated with Armand. It states everything, including his order to put the hormone in the nuns' food. Some of the onlookers gasped. Mother Marilyn's breathing was rapid. She could feel her heart pounding. Armand took another step back, his eyes wild with fear. You're a liar, he screamed. But Nestor was unshaken. Look at the signature inside. The truth is written here. Father Peter slowly took the journal, his hand shaking as he read it. After a few moments, his gaze fell to the floor. It's true. This is real evidence. Even the senior priest who had once sided with Armand could no longer deny it. Everything he had built his power, his control suddenly crumbled. Armand saw his end. No words came from his mouth. He suddenly turned and ran towards the back of the monastery, desperate to escape, but it was too late. The very people who had once supported him now blocked his path. You're not just getting away, a townsman said coldly. Quickly, the people surrounded him. First, a stone flew, followed by another. Armand fell to the ground as the rage of the town thundered around him. The guards rushed forward to stop the chaos, but it was too late. Armand was finished. 2 days later, the High Council of the church convened an emergency meeting. Inside a grand hall, the senior priests gathered, their expressions grave. At the front stood Mother Superior Marilyn and her sisters, waiting silently for the verdict. Bishop Armand was brought into the room. The once powerful bishop was now just a shadow of his former self. The verdict was certain. You have defiled the church and betrayed your sacred vows. Armand remained emotionless, but behind his cold gaze, everyone knew he was a defeated man. In a loud voice, the head priest announced the final decision. You are hereby removed from your position and will be permanently excommunicated from the church. Armand did not move. One by one, the priests turned their backs on him, a clear symbol of complete rejection. As he was led out of the monastery, a strange silence fell over the grounds. For the first time in many weeks, the monastery of St. Benedict felt a sense of peace. Marilyn looked up at the sky silently, offering her thanks. Around her, the nuns embraced, not out of fear, but in relief. They had lived in terror for too long. Now, they were free. But their work was not yet over. They needed to rebuild the monastery. They needed to restore their dignity, and their story was not yet finished. Bishop Armand was dragged out of St. Benedict's monastery, his face a mixture of rage and desperation. He had never imagined he would fall to such a state, abandoned by the very institution he once led. stripped of his titles, and cast out as a disgraced man. Outside, the crowd swelled, their whispers and conversations spreading like wildfire. A man pointed at him, his voice full of resentment. He deceived us all. A woman shook her head, tears welling in her eyes. We trusted him, but he was a monster. Then the first stone flew. Armand recoiled, trying to cover his face as more stones rained down. He screamed in protest, his voice trembling. "Stop! I am a bishop. I served God." But no one listened. The same people who had once been on his side now turned against him. The knights of the church did not intervene to protect him, but to permanently remove him, to erase his presence from the monastery forever. An old priest approached and pronounced the final sentence. "Bishop Armand, you are stripped of all rank and are forbidden to ever set foot in any monastery in this land. From this day forward, you are no longer part of the church." Armand fell to his knees, his lips trembling. No, this can't be happening. But the trial was over. As he was led away, the monastery gates opened, and there stood Mother Superior Marilyn. Before her stood her sisters, women who had endured shame and cruelty, but had never lost their faith. Now, justice had prevailed. Father Richard stepped forward, his voice steady and full of conviction. "The nuns of St. Benedict's Monastery are innocent. They never once broke their vows." Everyone fell silent. Then, a single clap broke the silence. An old woman, the same one who had once cursed the nuns, knelt before Mother Superior Marilyn. "Forgive us," she whispered. "We were blinded by lies." Marilyn looked around her, observing the people. Her voice was calm but firm. "The truth has triumphed, but above all, we must learn to forgive." Tears began to fall, not of sorrow, but of relief. The nuns embraced, free for the first time in a long time. The High Council of the Church met secretly to discuss Armand's final fate. In a lavish hall in the city where the Church's highest trials were held, Armand stood before the men he had once considered his brothers. The voice of a cardinal was sharp, full of weight and judgment. "You abused your power, persecuted the innocent, and defiled the Church." Armand no longer had the strength to argue, nor did he have any allies to defend him. The final sentence was read. Bishop Armand was to be permanently defrocked. All his titles, privileges, and properties were stripped away. He would be exiled to a remote monastery, where he would spend the rest of his life in complete isolation, without power or honor. Armand bowed his head, knowing he had no fight left. He was no longer a powerful bishop. He was nothing. Inside the great hall, the nuns stood in a long, sacred line. As Mother Superior Marilyn entered, Sister Paula rushed to her, hugging her tightly. "We are home." Marilyn smiled. For the first time in many weeks, she truly felt at peace. God never abandoned us. Father Richard nodded, full of respect. The truth always wins. Those who had once condemned the monastery returned, not as enemies, but as seekers of forgiveness. A group of townsfolk brought new flowers to the monastery gates. A man approached Marilyn and said respectfully, "If it weren't for you, we would not have known the truth. You were a light for us." Marilyn smiled, but she knew this victory was not hers alone. It was a victory for all who fought for justice. The monastery rose again as a pillar of hope. Where there was once darkness, there was now light. Where there was once oppression, there was now justice. A special mass was held, attended by people from far and wide, a thanksgiving to God, an acceptance of the truth, and an assurance that history would not repeat itself. At the altar stood Mother Marilyn, wearing her most distinguished habit, her hands trembling as she looked out at the congregation. Senior priests, townsfolk, and the nuns who were once cast out, but now stood with their heads held high. Father Richard stepped forward, his voice full of conviction. "Today, we thank God for guiding us back to the truth." "Amen," everyone replied in unison. Richard turned to Marilyn again, his eyes full of admiration. "If it weren't for your courage, we would not be here today." Everyone applauded, but Marilyn simply smiled humbly. Our faith is what brought the truth to light. From its devastation, St. Benedict's Monastery rose stronger than ever before. The nuns' names were completely cleared. The church established new laws to prevent abuse, and Armand, the once powerful bishop, was completely forgotten by the world. In the remote mountains, in a monastery without visitors, he spent the rest of his life. No title, no followers, and no worth. At Street Benedict's, it was not power that prevailed. What won was faith. What won was truth. What won was justice. And under the setting sun, their story was no longer a tragedy, but a testament that the darkness of evil can never defeat the light of truth.